Russia's invasion of Ukraine has not gone well for Russia in many ways, one of those being that it is unified global power against Vladimir Putin. As we've previously discussed with this invasion of Ukraine by Russia, it's actually not going very well for Russia. Many people expected that they would invade and within just a number of weeks have the core centers of Ukraine conquered. But we've just seen an incredible amount of strength and courage from the Ukrainian people, being able to hold their ground in many places and not give up their home. So that's been a huge failure on Russia's part. They just have not been able to do the invasion as effectively as they probably had hoped, which obviously is a really good thing. But also one of the things that Putin cares about is Russia being a strong global power that has more influence, or at least can stand up in influence against the West. So while that power and influence has kind of started to wane, you can see Putin's panicking, and that's why I think partly this invasion of Ukraine is about. He clearly has this vision of the Soviet Union and wants to bring Russia back to its former glory. So that's the second main area where this whole thing is going terribly wrong for Putin. Because the invasion isn't going very well, and the invasion has caused the world to unite against him, he now is even further from having that powerful Russia that he had hoped for, and is more alienated with less influence in the world. One of the big things that he sees as a threat to Russia, which I've talked about being absolutely stupid, not at all an excuse for invading Ukraine. But one of the things he brings up a lot as feeling threatening to Russia's power is NATO and its expansion. And so one of the things that he talked about being a provocative move was Ukraine thinking about joining NATO. So some people have talked about, okay, that could have been a reason why he invaded Ukraine. I don't think that was at all the cause. While I'm sure it was making him mad, it just doesn't rise to the level of justification to actually invade the country. I think he has larger aspirations with Ukraine. Nevertheless, clearly he has an issue with NATO expanding. He feels like that's a representation of the West's influence across the world growing, which, to be clear, it absolutely is. Whenever you join NATO, you are aligning yourself with the United States and other European countries that are thought of as the West. Well, now Finland and Sweden, after watching this invasion of Ukraine, are thinking, okay, we don't want to be threatened, and the way that we can keep our country safe is to also join NATO. So now potentially even more of Eastern Europe will be a part of NATO, causing them to be aligned with the West, which, if the reason for Putin invading Ukraine really was the fact that Ukraine was considering joining NATO, then this is just a complete fall on Putin's face. Because now more countries are uniting with the West, causing Russia's influence to decrease because he did this crazy, stupid action. Reading from the New York Times, as Russia's grinding war pulverizes eastern Ukraine and eats away at the global economy, it is also creating unintended consequences for President Vladimir V. Putin, whose aggression is giving rise to a stronger Western aligned security architecture in Europe, the very thing the Russian leader had hoped to weaken. Finland's leaders announced on Thursday that their country should apply for NATO membership without delay, while Swedish leaders are expected to do the same within days. It is a remarkable shift by two nations on Russia's doorstep that had long remained non-aligned militarily, but where public opinion has lurched strongly toward joining the alliance in the 11 weeks since Russia invaded Ukraine. So a big thing on Putin's mind, and part of the reason that he's so irrational and angry, is the power balance between Russia and the West has been leaning a lot more in the West's direction. And like we talked about, a big reason for that is NATO. And so he wants NATO to not expand. But then, because he invaded Ukraine, Finland and Sweden's populations really want protection that they can get through NATO. And as you can see on this map we'll put up on the screen, Finland is directly bordering Russia, and then Sweden is just to the west of them. So what Putin hates is Eastern expansion, especially anything on his border being aligned with NATO. And now that's exactly what's happening. Finland, Sweden want to be a part of NATO, and I assume will be able to get in. And there's a lot of mixed views, especially on the left, about NATO. Which countries should be a part of NATO? Is it good, bad, whatever? I'm usually of the mind that the more alliances we can make among many countries, I think will lead to a more stable world, especially a military alliance like NATO. But even if you didn't believe that, I can't imagine a more effective argument than just watching Russia invade Ukraine. Because I can tell you, once Finland and Sweden become a part of NATO, they're pretty much untouchable. So if Ukraine had been a part of NATO already, they would have been untouchable. So if you didn't believe before this war in NATO's value, I think you definitely should believe it now. And while of course the war goes on, Russia is doing so much damage in Ukraine, countless lives lost, cities just being destroyed. At least there's something positive coming out of it, and that is the weakening of Putin and Russia's power in the world. And it's always fun to see a horrible person like Vladimir Putin have his big master plan backfire so badly.